Well, I'm going to call this meeting to order. My name is Cynthia Kraft. I'm the chair of the Transportation Advisory Board. This is the regular monthly meeting, December 16th. And let's see, already lost track. Did I already say my name is Cynthia Kraft? Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. And I'm seeking approval of the minutes by unanimous consent as presented. Not hearing any objections, so the minutes are approved as presented. Make a funny face at me if I went too fast. I'm not seeing anyone with any problem with that. Okay, great. Toggle back over here. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any public comment?
And I have not received any notification of someone wanting to provide public comments.
Okay, well, hearing none, we'll move on to regular business. And the first item is the vice chair nominations, and Isabel's going to lead us through this discussion. And I just wanted to add one thing to the memo that went out, and that's it's not necessarily a formal responsibility, but the practice that we've been doing from the very beginning on this board is that the vice chair not only just substitutes in case the chair isn't available, but also participates fully in the staff chair meeting that always happens before every meeting. And in those meetings, we help set the agenda and we frame the discussion and provide feedback on materials. And so we kind of act as a sounding board as staff is preparing for meetings. And every meeting I've been in, we've been doing that together. And it's pretty valuable to have two people to think that through together. So again, Sujata is missed because she was really good at that. And so I just wanted to make that point clear before I hand it over to Isabel to lead us through this discussion.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. As Cynthia mentioned, with Sujata's resignation due to medical reasons, the vacant vice chair position, this position will serve for the remaining term that will end in April 30th, 2022. We have solicited self-nominations and received Joseph's letter of interest. Joseph, thank you. We are now opening nominations during the meeting. Are there any nominations for the vice chair serving the remaining term through April 2022?
Hi, this is Christy. Yes, I would like to make a nomination of Micah for consideration as well for the role.
Thank you, Christy. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, the nominations are closed. Micah, you don't necessarily have to accept the nomination during the meeting, but we will ask that if you are accepting your nomination, you submit a letter of acceptance of nomination so we can provide the tab for the next meeting in January 2022, that we can provide the tab with the information of Joseph and Micah's nominations so we can do the voting then on the next meeting on January 2022. Are there any questions or this? Yes, Christy, I see your hand up.
Hi, sorry about that. One question I had was if it was possible for us as a board to send a card to Sujata to not only recognize her contributions and volunteer time, but to wish her well as she's going through this medical journey. She's been a great contributing member of our team.
Yes, that is a great idea. and that is something we can arrange as well. Would if the board agrees, we can uh, coordinate that. Would it be our and Stephen, I'll ask here for your input. Would that be would be better like a handwritten card for these kind of things, right? Instead of having a digital card.
Yeah, so we'll work with the chair to select a card, and then we'll distribute the card out to everybody, so we can get it to her in a timely fashion.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Christy. I really appreciate it. I think I've been kind of still like stunned for a little while, and I didn't think to do that. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up. I also just want to say one other thing, and that's I do appreciate Joseph, your self-nomination, and I appreciate Christy you bringing that up, and hoping that Michael will accept the nomination, and look forward to that discussion. But everybody is valued, and everybody's contribution is valued, and so obviously since we have two that are on the table, then presumably that would go to one, and I just want to make sure that whoever's not selected is make sure you understand that we value everyone's contribution. But I'm really excited to see people stepping up. So thank you. Hi, Erica.
Hi,
That's
Erica.
all I have to say.
I now have a question. Since Erica just joined, do we need to like allow her the opportunity to nominate if she would like so?
Are you asking Stephen or me? I was just going to say that technically, I think you did just close the nomination, but I think that we would certainly like to hear if Erica has something to say about that, because I don't know if we can open it again, but technically, but it'd be nice to know if there's a burning concern there, just to kind of be as
Yeah.
communicative as possible.
I'm not contesting that. It's on me that I'm late. So I'm totally fine with not like reopening anything. I just wanted to confirm, I caught the tail end of it. It sounds like I've seen, in addition to Joseph's self-nomination, Micah has also been nominated.
Yes.
Okay.
I do think that, from my recollection of Robert's rules, you can reopen the nomination. So I think, Erica, if there's someone you want to nominate, then I think that just let us know, and then we as the board can just agree to reopen it and then reclose it. And also, Christy, thank you for the nomination. I do accept. I will send a letter in formally.
Thank you.
Erica, do you have any comments? You don't, so fairness aside or late aside, whatever, I mean, we're all, want to do the right thing here. Do you have any interest in opening the nomination again?
I do not, but thank you so much.
Okay. I think it's a sign of a healthy board that we have a couple people that are willing to do that. So that's awesome. I think we've got a good group here. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So then moving on to the next item on the agenda, we currently have two positions vacant, one for the regular member and another for the alternate member. I am opening tonight a discussion on how we can reach out to community members and businesses to recruit members to the board, since city clerk every year does a regular recruitment, goes through the regular recruitment process at the beginning of the year. We want to encourage the tab, if you know of anyone that you would like to reach out to apply to any of these two positions, feel free to do so. If you have ideas as well on how we can reach out to community members to apply for these two positions, we are open for suggestions. And we don't necessarily have to like mention any name tonight. You can reach out to them separately, and it's only to discuss how we can reach out, ideas on how we can reach out to communities. Yes, Cynthia.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, do we have any areas of either expertise, lived experience, geography? I'm told, I've asked a question about geography, I'm told we're pretty well balanced. Is there anything that you feel like, and I guess this question is for everyone really, but it particularly maybe staff who's probably tracking it closer, is there anything that we're missing in terms of point of view or anything that might shape a robust group?
I'm wondering if there's any thought to, and I know they're not Issaquah specific, so they would have to narrow it down, but like just at the front of my mind, like Disability Rights Washington is like a big stakeholder group. They have obviously a very vested interest in transportation. I have a contact, I like have at least a name that's again more broad, like they do more like government relations with them, but that I can pass on. And I think from their membership, they could probably, you know, whittle down and see like if there's folks like of their kind of constituency that live in Issaquah or yeah.
Yes, you can email me that contact, Erica. I'll be happy to reach out to them. Thank you. Cynthia.
I'm going to state the obvious. I don't know how everyone on this board identifies. Most of you have never met in person, but when I look at the screen, I see a predominance of white faces. And so I'm just going to throw that out there and just say it would be nice to see more people of color on our board. I don't know how to go about that specifically. I just wanted to say that, put it on the table.
Thank you about that. Anyone else?
I can see Micah's raising his hand.
Oh, yes, Micah.
Hi, sorry, my hand was kind of over my myself. So I know you said that we are fairly representative of geography, but as we know, geography captures a lot beyond just the actual location. But I think the location is not to be undervalued due to the nature of transportation. A blind spot of maybe all of us literally just there's a certain part of Issaquah where we're not biking through or walking through or driving through, and we're completely missing that. And so I would be curious, without, I don't know whether our addresses when we joined the board became public or not, but within respect to people's privacy, whether we could look at and just make sure that we really do cover the whole geography of Issaquah, but also looking at, are we all, for the most part, in kind of the very neighborhood or condo areas versus the, a little bit more rural parts, or do we all border? Are we all kind of closer to the border, closer to major thoroughfares? It's something like that to try and capture some of these other things that are a little harder to look at and harder to reach out for. But if there is anything geography wise, and by geography, I don't mean literally just location, I mean just kind of where we are situated to different roads and types of housing that would kind of point us in a direction we look at.
Yes, Christy.
I was also thinking if, I don't know of any, but you all may, if there's any transportation consultants here in Issaquah, that would be helpful to have join our team. And then also, if there's a larger business or medium-sized business that could, that might be interested as well, just in terms of, having a lot of people who enter and leave the city in terms of the workforce on a daily basis. It would be great to have their perspective, maybe from a different angle.
Okay. Thank you. And just to add a little bit more to Micah's point, we have talked about this with the chair during chair meetings about the geographical representation of Issaquah, and that's something we plan on looking further to make sure that we have representations from all the geographic areas. Any other thoughts?
Does anyone here have a contact with the like the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank or any other nonprofit that serves some of the more underserved or underrepresented members of our community? Does anybody on this board have a contact that Joseph, to you? Yeah, I see a couple half nods and half arms. Joseph, tell us about it.
Yeah, the Issaquah Youth Advisory Board actually works with the like Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank, but we actually held a fundraiser there last year, or I think a food and clothing drive, but there's also some other places like I think Eastside Baby Corner, and me personally I work with the Acres of Diamonds, which has like a homeless shelter at like in Issaquah near the city hall. So
I feel like some other people said some kind of raised their hand partway.
Christy, thanks. Did you also raise your hand, Christy, about a contact?
I did. I know Corey Walters, the director of the food bank, and we're actually meeting for a capital update with her next month. So I'm happy to ask the question if that's something of interest of the group.
Yes. You can feel free to reach out yourselves and also to send me by email the contacts so we can reach out to them. Does anyone have any other thoughts?
I think it might be useful to have reach out to Cascade or any other bike advocacy groups. Have a clear membership list and you know, send the general membership message through Issaquah just to see if anyone's interested.
Anyone else before I try to summarize what I have heard? Okay. So based on what I have heard so far, if I am leaving anything out, please let me know. Members with disabilities, bringing more members of color on the board, geographical representation from every location, Issaquah Food and Bank, and Cascade Bicycle Team. I know I am missing something.
Joseph mentioned Eastside Baby Corner.
Eastside Baby Corner. All right. Thank you. Am I missing anything, or is there anything else? Okay, so then we can move on to the agenda, Cynthia. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. That's great. It's always great to have some new folks. It's really great that this group has been together now for some time because it was like a catastrophic change at the beginning of this year. So it's nice that we've got some time and then there's some new people coming in. So, okay, so moving on to item 4C, land use code update. We have a presentation from Stephen. Take it away, Stephen.
All right, thank you. So tonight I'm going to talk about Title 18 and what that project kind of entails, because it's a fairly large project and a little complicated if you don't really regularly work with land use code and those type of projects. Tonight I will talk. I'll provide an overview of the project and go into kind of the status update of where we're going and what we're going to be working on next, and then cover expectations for how the subcommittee will be kind of supporting our portion of the project. For tonight, it's more of a general discussion with the board of what the project is, but I'm hoping to get a little bit of feedback on how we might be able to maximize kind of the contribution of the board into this project. And so that we went over my initial questions last month when I briefly went over this to describe what the project is, and everybody agreed that a subcommittee is going to be the best direction to go. But I'm going to go a little more detailed tonight in terms of what's in the project and how we're going to be working with the subcommittee and setting kind of expectations of how their contribution will be adding into the project itself. So diving in, land use code. This isn't a topic we typically touch very often, and I think it's helpful to start at the foundation of what Title 18 and land use code is. And in its basic form, it's a range of development requirements that regulate how land is subdivided and used or developed. And to explain it further, it helps to define the rules for zoning and landscaping or development. And more important, for our discussion, we'll be focusing a little bit more on parking and circulation as it relates to development and construction and permit review. So the framework for land use, for those that aren't familiar or haven't used land use regulations, they are the way they are because we're required to have them by the state through a state regulation called the Growth Management Act. And because we're in a metropolitan area or metropolitan region that includes Snohomish, King, Pearson, and Kitsap County, there's certain regional requirements that our land use code has to follow. And because we're in King County, there's also another level of requirements that our land use code must adhere to as well. And for the vast majority of the land use code is filled with more local and finer details that are more relevant to Issaquah's community and identified in the comprehensive plan beyond just the regional or state requirements. And this is important to note because growth management requires us to address a lot of the topics that are on your screen in our comprehensive plan and subsequent planning documents. While we're not covering all these topics in all of our meetings, this helps us explain how complex our land use code can be and why this project is so big, because there's all these different sections that we're having to cover, and we're trying to update a lot of what's in there so that they're consistent with a lot of our planning documents. Now, I mentioned state regulations before that are required by the Growth Management Act, and there's different elements to that. And we have something called SEPA, which is the State Environmental Protection Act, which is a required tool to help us identify things that often fall through the cracks when it's not addressed by what's in our city code. There's also shoreline regulations, which deals with any adjacency to lakes, creeks, anything with bodies of water that have to flow through the jurisdiction. There's certain subdivisions which must be administered in a certain way, so there's a consistent method of how land is divided up in a fair manner. We also have critical areas, so wetlands, regulations which help us minimize and reduce impacts on local streams and our local environment. These are all major sets of regulation which impact how we manage city systems or plan out the city's implementation of its future vision. So locally, we cover, Issaquah has its own plans and regulations, and we cover different topics in our plans. And at this time, our code updates must be consistent with how these plans get updated. And we have our 6-year strategic plan, which was just adopted a few years ago, which helps us identify a lot of what we are trying to prioritize for the next 6 years. We have our 20-year comprehensive plan, which is more of that long-term vision, but it provides guidance on how we're implementing our land use code or even our projects that we're trying to invest in. We have the Central Issaquah plan, which is more specific to the Central Issaquah area on providing guidance on new development and how we implement our vision and where we focus a lot of our growth. We have our Park Strategic Plan and Mobility Master Plan, which are more specific to parks and our transportation system. And we recently adopted our Climate Action Plan. And so there's a lot of different complexities and a lot of different pull in how our land use code is enforced and what it regulates. So to the project itself, Title 18, the land use code, is a tool. Or a set of tools that the city uses and follows when it comes to zoning, when it comes to design review or any type of land use process or land use review process, or when we're trying to change something. It includes elements of sustainability when we want to make sure that we're going through these processes, sustainability is being accounted for. On the very basic level, this is what our land use process looks like. It starts with informal meetings with the planning department, which start with an introduction, someone looking to develop some land and ask questions of what they can and cannot do. Then the applicant submits the necessary documents to move forward in a more structured staff review process. It then gets reviewed by the Development Commission, who discusses merits of land use action, and a decision is made. And our code also identifies if the applicant doesn't like the decision, there's an appeal process they can go through. So this is the basic process that we all have to follow for projects, construction, all the way down to once the site is occupied and we're having to do enforcement and review of how construction went. An update on the project is that, or at least I'll back up a little bit. The work for this project actually started back in 2019 when the city recognized several updates that needed to take on. But in 2020, there was a pause on the project due to the pandemic. We wanted to have a pause on the work that's being done and take a little more time and deeper thought into the type of changes we were wanting to make. So the city council formed an ad hoc committee to help advise staff and the project managers on how to really approach and how best to address a lot of the issues that they were really trying to accommodate through the project update. We'll be using the goals and outcomes document, which was attachment A for this agenda item, as our main guide for this project. So we'll be working with the subcommittee to identify or at least align the changes that we're proposing with the goals out of that document, but also aligning them with a lot of the principles that we're calling for in the Mobility Master Plan or even the citywide strategic plan. So that first step that we'll be looking at is looking at a gaps analysis, which is a memo that we'll be developing in early 2022 to identify where our code improvements need to be made and why. And then we'll be working with the subcommittee to look at potential solutions after we identify the gaps and identify how best to address those issues or even approach the solutions. So that we can have a little more feedback before we bring anything to the Planning Policy Commission or even to the City Council. The goal is to have the amendments or the code changes adopted by the end of 2022. So the topics we'll be covering, at least in this project in its entirety, is split up in these different types of categories, but between different staff in the planning department. And we'll be working with the TAB with a joint subcommittee with the Economic Vitality Commission to look at parking and circulation, which is the bolded categories on the screen. So the goals for parking is primarily working on looking through potential changes of how do we prioritize reducing conflict in the code and then review other potential changes that may help achieve those goals. And the goals in bold are those identified specifically for this project, and the goals not in bold are those that are identified in our plans that will feed into this process as well. And the same for circulation. Bold are those identified for this project, and the ones not in bold are those identified through our plans. And we'll be working with the subcommittee to identify how best to achieve a lot of these goals as we're going through circulation and for parking. So for next year, what the board and the subcommittee can expect is we'll be actually having our first meeting in early January to discuss the gaps analysis, and then another meeting in March to discuss proposed changes. This doesn't mean that we won't have additional meetings, but at the very the basic plans is to have these two main discussions to feed into the project. Right now, we're not planning to have a third meeting because that's going to be really around when we have a full draft review, which we think everybody is able to do on their own. But once that's available, we can always check in with the subcommittee to see if a third or fourth meeting is going to be necessary to kind of continue on with the project. So for the meetings in the first and second phase, we'll be meeting with the Economic Vitality Commission subcommittee so that we can capture both groups' feedbacks, as both groups are the advisors for those transportation and economic policies for the city. And this is kind of the breakdown of what you could expect at each of the meetings. For the gaps analysis, we'll be looking at contradictions. We'll be looking at any level of confusion that there might be in the language that's used in code as we align it with kind of the goals that are identified by the Council Ad Hoc Committee. For the solutions in March, we will look specifically at following kind of that gaps analysis, looking at solutions that align with most of our goals and discuss best approach with Planning Policy Commission as well as with City Council. And then the draft review in May potentially is hopeful to be independent, but we'll have that discussion with the subcommittee again to see if a third or our next meeting is necessary. And then following that May discussion or May review process, we'll go into the legislative process with adoption by December of next year. So the questions I have for the board tonight, as it relates to how we work with the subcommittee, is what information is helpful to know as we start the process in early 2022? And the other question is, how should we involve the full board as part of this project? Some of the reason we wanted to go with the subcommittee was because of the time commitment that was going to be going to this project, but we don't want to exclude the board of any opportunities to be able to give feedback on the project as well. And just for discussion, Cynthia, here's just some ideas of board involvement that we could discuss in 2022 as part of the project. We could ultimately just provide an update to the board in the summer 2022 after we've had the solutions discussions. We could come back to the board and do a quick review of the draft proposal around the end of spring, and or if time allows in the monthly meetings, provide regular updates to the board as the project progresses with the subcommittee.
Hey, Stephen, I'll go ahead and manage the chat, and let's go back to our traditional way of putting comments or questions in the chat. So Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, considering I signed up for interest in this subcommittee, I think regular updates for the rest of the board would be the most useful, particularly after each stage. Just basic context. Don't go too deep into the subject, and in case anyone else in the board has been following along, they can provide comments. So just some basic context and basic, checking in for each stage of the update.
Thanks, Julian. Micah?
Yeah, so basically like to echo what Julian said. I also signed up for this. I think it's important that we, for spring 2022, we get something on the agenda so we make sure that we have time for, like a longer, more time than just a regular updates. And then as far as regular updates, I think as we meet in the subgroup, there's going to be some things that it's clear is something that the board is going to be interested in hearing, and there's going to be some things that are probably not as critical to share. And so that way we can maybe at the end of each subgroup go, okay, here's the things we want to make sure we share with the board, but keep that short so we can cover our main business. And then for spring and then of course summer, we have dedicated time.
Thanks, Micah. Christy?
I would agree with that approach. One thing I might suggest when we review the draft proposal in spring, however, is that we get kind of a demonstration of how a code might be applied to a project, just to give a visual representation, because sometimes it's easy to read that code and think, yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking, but when it gets implied, it doesn't necessarily work, or maybe has some unintended consequences. So I think that would be a real practical way for us to kind of review the code as well.
Erica, go ahead. Thanks,
Is
Christy.
this something, if we do, I am interested in regular updates, but I know that like we'll push in to time for our meetings, but is it something that could be incorporated into like a staff report at the end, maybe if we were wanting some more regular updates?
Yes, so I think it'll depend on the update. I think what we'll do is we will assess after every kind of stage of the project to see what kind of updates, based on the subcommittee feedback, is it just an informal update? Then yeah, I think it makes sense to probably incorporate as part of the staff updates. Or if there's something where we're wanting full board feedback on something, we'll probably add it to the agenda as a small item.
I think I'm next on the list. I was just going to say that, and thank you, Erica. I was just going to say, I think the people that we really want to hear from are people who are not on the subcommittee. And I actually don't know who is and who isn't on the subcommittee. So I want to make sure that people who are not on the subcommittee are weighing in on that.
Right, thank you. So the three main people that volunteered to participate on the subcommittee was you, Cynthia, Julian, and Micah.
Jerry, I think you were next, but yeah, I just want to poke the rest of you that aren't on it to make sure you, if you haven't already, let us know what you think. Thanks.
Sure. So as long as I would just think that if a gaps analysis was going to be developed, it would be nice at every meeting to just have a summary of what this subcommittee did, and maybe it'd be like 5 minutes. It's kind of like the youth report or something. Somebody could just give a summary of what's been happening and what the solutions are for the gaps analysis. Was the way I saw it. And then the other issue is I was really curious if the consultant was going to come up with the gaps, or was that going to be the subcommittee would come up with the gaps to that Title 18?
So
that's more of a question about your plan, Stephen. So
yes, thank you. So it'll be primarily staff actually working with the subcommittee, and there's 3 different stakeholder groups, including this subcommittee, our joint subcommittee that we're going to be speaking to. So we'll be incorporating everybody's feedback into the gaps analysis memo as well as into the solutions. And I think putting together a summary of a lot of the discussions and align or how it all aligns with the final approach makes sense. So I think that's something that we can incorporate into the board's work plan.
Yeah, or maybe something written would be just as helpful as part of the meeting notice, correct? So is that what you were saying, Stephen? So,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Joseph.
Yeah, sort of just like what Erica and Jerry said. I think that summary or just like updates on or regular updates every meeting on like sort of what's been happening would be a good idea in my personal opinion.
I'm going to call myself again. Did you want to go back to what we need? Because you had two questions on that slide. But I want to make sure that everybody had a chance to comment on how to keep the board involved. It seems like everybody did. Did we miss anybody there? And then, Stephen, could we go back? Does that make sense to go back to this? What kind of information do we need?
Yes, please. Some of you touched on it, but if anybody has additional comments on the type of information or how best to kind of approach some of the discussions we'll be having with the subcommittee and the board for kind of the regular updates, it's helpful for us to kind of start preparing for that now.
So I had a couple things that I jotted down when I was preparing for this. And I don't know if it's appropriate. I don't know if it's more of a subcommittee thing, but I just thought I would take these off real quick. I personally would like a little more in-depth background and maybe some plain language around this document that's goals, policy changes that I understand the subcommittee came up with. It's nice to have it all summarized, but a lot of times things have to get bigger before they can get smaller, and I'm interested in the bigger part. I want to hear a little bit more about like expand on what's in that document on the specific things that we're going to focus on. That would be really helpful. And even if you need to just tell us to go watch, I don't know if those meetings are all on video, they probably are, or that's I don't know, the subcommittee, but I'd love to hear more. I'd love to bring that to life a little bit because it's pretty, compact. That was one thing. I had two other things. One is, well, the next two are really the same, just two ways of asking the question. And I think that parking and circulation, probably like a lot of things in transportation, is like the thoughts have changed over the last couple of decades, generation or two, generation and a half. What are some lessons learned? Because I think parking is one of those things that expanding roadways can be counterintuitive. And you can think you need more parking and that the answer is that you should put more parking in. But I feel like we've gotten smarter over the last generation, and it'd be really good to just maybe have a brief overview about what we've learned in the profession about this topic and mistakes that have been made in the past, and kind of some vision, because it's one of those things that everybody wants to find a parking space, just like nobody wants the traffic in front of them, but that what seems like are the easy answers sometimes have unintended consequences, and it'd be good to sort of share some of what the profession has learned over the last couple decades. And that's all I had to say on that. And it looks like Julian had a comment.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially with providing some reading literature when it comes to markets and parking provisions and putting parking near transit and things like that. I think that'd be useful to include some readings for that and just some basic readings, like Donald Shoup. And so I think that's really useful, just to provide some of that additional reading context before this work begins for everyone that's not in the subcommittee as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'd just to respond in terms of preparations of information, our hope is to break a lot of what we'll be covering into very much more digestible sections, so that you won't have to prepare as much, but our plan is to provide homework for the subcommittee to look at prior to the meeting, so that you have a better understanding before we meet. It will give you much more effective in our discussions at the meeting.
Erica.
I feel like this is super basic, but I guess like for like what I would want to know before the process is started is how is like the board at large, like not the subcommittee, like how if we have feedback for stuff that subcommittee members or staff bring back to us in the updates, then like how is that feedback going to be incorporated? Is it just like relayed through the subcommittee members? Is it relayed through like the Venn diagram of staff from like the subcommittee to our board? I don't know if that's like just you, Stephen, or, and like if it's like, if I've got thoughts, obviously like I'll speak them in our board meeting, but then is it also better to have that in writing and send that off? Yeah, I think just like the how, like I feel like that's, yeah, super basic, but
I think that's a good question. And it's also very important because we want to make sure that we're being effective with everybody's time, but also relaying the messages that we're having in those discussions, to make sure that we're getting the correct messages to the next level, and that being the Planning Policy Commission as well as the City Council, who are going to be reviewing a lot of these and just as much detail as the subcommittee. And so we want to make sure that we're capturing everybody's comments. And so I think as we progress through the project and before we even move through each phase, we'll always have kind of a final touch point with the subcommittee or the board to make sure that we're capturing everybody's feedback correctly.
Sorry, I couldn't get my cursor to hover over the unmute thing. I have a question for the board, and that's, do you want, when they send out materials for the subcommittee meeting, is it appropriate to copy the full board so that you at least know, like, even if you don't have time to dig into it, you just have some passing knowledge of what it is that we're planning to discuss, and if you have extra time or interest, you can dive into it. Is that I guess the question for Stephen is there any reason we couldn't do that? And for the board, do you want that? Or are you like, don't give me more email?
If we're going to be bringing a lot of the topics, we'll probably give the board all those materials before we bring it to them. I don't really want to give the board a lot of these materials, a month or two before we actually talk about it with them. But we can also give a lot of the materials a little bit further ahead of time before that meeting where we actually have the discussion with the board and provide the summary together. So it's a little more connected than spread out in terms of as the project progresses, we kind of keep things together. Is that fair to kind of provide for the board instead of like right when we provide it to the subcommittee, we provide it to the board when we have the discussion?
I feel like maybe people on the board want to just know what they're missing. That's kind of where I'm coming from. Only some of you are on my screen because the presentation is up, and I saw a nod from Erica and I saw Christy's question. So I don't want to confuse things, and I personally get overwhelmed sometimes when I get too much information. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to look at it, but I feel like if I weren't serving on the subcommittee, I want to at least know what I'm missing, even if it's preliminary, and I know I don't have to be responsible for absorbing it quite yet. But that's kind of where I'm coming from, Stephen. I don't know, what are you, there nods elsewhere on this? I'm trying to scroll through my postage stamp pictures of all you people and see if there's any responses. I mean, I'll be on the subcommittee, so it's not that much to me, but and I'm kind of looking to the rest of you to say whether you agree with Stephen and you rather kind of have it when it's a little more baked, or do you want to have a just passing update? There we go. Now you can see everybody. Just maybe if you feel like, if you're not on the subcommittee and you feel like you'd like to see a little more information, even if it's not baked yet, because you kind of want to have a passing knowledge, maybe raise your hand. Okay, other people don't. Okay, Christy, yeah, and Erica, yeah. Okay, so Stephen, do you think you could find something, some interim that you're comfortable with, where we don't have to send half-baked stuff out to them, but we could figure something out?
Yeah, well, I'll talk to John and Isabella how best to do that. My fear is giving the board too much where everybody wants to provide feedback and it completely negates the need to have a subcommittee. And so there's kind of a balance there where if the board, everybody, the quorum of the board wants to have the discussion and provide feedback, we have to do it in this place of our regular meetings. But if it's the subcommittee, then it's a different process. So it kind of depends on how much feedback everyone wants to provide.
What if people just agree to bring their feedback to the regular board meeting? Because
Yes.
you're absolutely right. You can't start an unofficial virtual meeting by email. But if people just understand that, I mean, I'm assuming everybody understands what he's talking about and that we can't just like, yeah. So if you guys all just, yeah. Anyway, Stephen, and we can, if for some reason we think about it more and we think this is not going to work, we can report back to the group. But how about if we just get everybody to agree not to start a sub discussion and bring any comments either one-on-one to a member, Julie and Mike or myself, or in the meeting, but nothing in between. And understand that it's just materials for a meeting that you're not necessarily responsible for digesting. And it's preliminary, it might change and you might be wasting your time. But I don't know, I just feel like we haven't done a subcommittee yet, and I sense that maybe people want to know what's going on. So it sounds like maybe we've reached kind of a compromise.
Yep. So we'll get back to the board on how best to approach it so that we can get all the information out to everybody correctly, and then also allow everybody to have the formal discussions as part of the board meetings as well.
Cool. So Stephen, did you get what you needed on this topic?
I did. Thank you.
Do we have anything else to discuss on this topic?
No, that concludes my presentation for.
Julian, you look like you're about to speak. Do you have something you want to say, Julian? No. Okay. All right. Well, that sounds like we are moving right along, and we're on item 4D, the Master Mobility Plan Review. So that's Stephen also.
Thank you for having me here. Tonight I'm going to talk about, so this item is a review that the board asked for earlier this year when we went through the process in discussion with the City Council to review the Mobility Master Plan after we've had some time to go through some implementation of the Mobility Master Plan, because it was only adopted earlier this year. And so it's in the grand scheme of master planning and implementation, that's not a ton of time, but we surprisingly have been able to be very effective and efficient this year. And so we've gone through several tasks, which I'll go over tonight. So I'll provide a very quick overview of what's in the Mobility Master Plan, a lot of what many of you already know. I'll discuss a lot of the 2021 work items that we have gone through with the board, but also have gone through at the staff level as a response to the work that's been done with the board. And then I'll provide a process on the type of updates that we go through and what allows us to be able to make updates to the Mobility Master Plan and next steps. So the questions I'll have for you tonight, and hopefully you think about this as I kind of go through everything, is thinking back on a lot of the work that we've done together. Are there small items that need clarification in the Mobility Master Plan that you've noticed as you've read through it, or that we've kind of had some of our discussion in our work where it felt like more information would have been nice to have, or would be necessary to really get what the intent is for a policy or even something in the guiding principles? Or are there really major items that we need to be considered in the next update of the Mobility Master Plan, which will be part of the comp plan, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So like I said, the master plan was just adopted this last March, and so it's fairly new. The issues that have been brought up are on the next slide, and which I'll talk about in the development of the mobility master plan. But what's in the mobility master plan is really made up of the guiding principles and goals and policies. These are the main items that we've used to identify where our priorities are in projects and investments, but also where we're dedicating our time as staff, but also our time on our regular meetings with the board. So what's on the screen is the major projects that we've gone through with the board this year, but the issues that have been raised. So when we've gone through the first phase of the transportation improvement program earlier this year, one of the biggest concerns one of the biggest issues that was raised was with the guiding principles and the amount of clarity there was as they were adapted into criteria that is used to prioritize projects. When we went through the second phase of that project, there was a little more concern around project diversity, not necessarily in what was prioritized, but in the overall list. It seemed like there wasn't as much non-motorized, and there definitely wasn't as much transit projects that members would have liked, which is fair. We've lacked a lot of those type of projects, and so more discussion I think is going to be needed to address a lot of that. More specifically, when we talked about major projects that staff is working on and brought it to the board, relating to the guiding principles issue, there were some complaints that maybe more guidance was necessary to really look at what the intent of on certain topics and how that can be better applied to the projects that we're implementing on the ground. On the staffing level, there's a concern on the grant side where with project diversity or lack thereof, or even the staffing to have the capacity to address a lot of the grants, there's concern that we aren't as competitive in some of the grant processes because we don't have as strong of projects to be able to go after for funding. And then back to the transit point, which we'll be addressing with the development of the transit study next year, is identifying transit specific projects, which will make improvements to corridors or even intersections that allow for improvements for speed and reliability, or even any type of new service that we might bring to the city. So looking at the different quarters of the year and the major projects that we worked on, we were able to accomplish a lot comparative to a lot of the work that the board's worked on before, which was primarily just the development of the mobility master plan. And so we've been able to work through a update to the complete streets policy, as well as the transportation improvement program. And just for everybody's perspective, the city hasn't updated the TIP in over a decade. And for most cities, they don't typically update their entire process for a TIP for multiple decades. It's usually a process that's pretty held and firm and doesn't change very often. You might change the projects and you might change smaller elements of how you prioritize projects, but we did almost a complete overhaul of how we prioritize projects, as well as how we look at the projects on the list. And so that's a huge accomplishment I think this board should be proud of, because we were able to work through a lot in a relatively short amount of time, in addition to a lot of the other projects that are listed on the screen. I think being able to have major discussions like Newport as a major project and going through policy discussions on those type of things is one of the main intentions, or at least the original intentions of this board, to provide support for staff as well as the city council. So getting back to the type of updates we would need to go through if we were to approach any type of changes to the mobility master plan, because it's tied to the comprehensive plan, there are specific rules on how we're able to make updates, or at least when and the type of process we have to go through. So usually we go through annual updates, which are typically used to clarify issues or go over limited types of clarifications or topics in a limited fashion. It's usually not as robust. Doesn't typically involve a huge engagement process unless it's a major project as part of a larger idea. But for the most part, these updates don't usually impact the city's vision, which is more part of the other type of update, which is the full comprehensive plan update. And the plan is actually to be taking on something like that in 2023, which it's been several years since we've gone through a full comprehensive plan update, which is typically done every 7 years. And this is when we bring up the city vision, as well as all the goals and policies that are inside the comprehensive plan, and have that bigger discussion with the community. And so this involves a much more significant community involvement process, and often can take up to 2 years to complete for most cities. So that effort is going to be a huge endeavor. I think that'll involve major discussions on transit, as well as other elements of the mobility master plan. In terms of updates we're expecting to make in the next several years, the slide has a list of all the major items that we're expecting to have to make changes to the mobility master plan, as well as the comp plan. Next year, starting the transit study and also taking on a study of our ITS, or a signal system, we'll be taking a look at these type of improvements and where we should be making changes in these areas. Another two items don't really have specific timelines, but they're really on deck for improvement, is the walking and biking elements of the mobility master plan, as well as having a big discussion about concurrency again. Just like in any other plan, we need to make sure our data is updated, as well as our perspective of how we want to approach these topics. And so the goals need to be adapted to any of the changes in the community in terms of if we want to approach something different. So we'll need to have those discussions. The last two items are items which might likely take multiple small updates over several years. Light rail and safety are big items that you can't really get done in just one swoop. It takes multiple discussions over several years as you approach certain aspects of light rail or safety. They're very complex topics that you can't address in just a simple plan development. It's something you take on in multiple strides. So the direction we're hoping to get from the board tonight is, are there small issues that we need clarification on that we should be starting to plan for? And are there major items that we should be considering in the next update? One thing that's important is we weren't, because we're taking on the comprehensive plan in 2023, we weren't really expecting to do an annual update next year in 2022, because we'll be starting that process for the comp plan, and we're wanting to make sure any other changes that we might be considering will have to be as part of that larger package. But I wanted to be able to still have this opportunity to have this discussion with the board tonight of, reviewing some of the work that we've done, tapping into some of your memory on a lot of the discussions we've had this year on the projects we've been able to bring to the board meetings. And I don't know if it's helpful for me to take this off the screen for discussion, or if you want me to go back to the list of items, of the major items and the issues. Is it helpful? I'm seeing some nods, so I'll go back to that list. Oh, different list. So again, the questions I have are small items that need clarification, or major items that should be part of the bigger update.
So, Stephen, since we have a little time, I was wondering if you could, I don't know if the rest of you are interested in this, but I was wondering if you could be a little more specific about some of the comments you made on this slide. Specific project review, the first one, TIP phase 1, I was not totally tracking and trying to rack my brain, to remember what you were talking about. So since I'm not seeing the chat light up, I'll just maybe ask you to maybe pick one or two of those and be a little more in depth because I wasn't entirely tracking.
Sure. So I mean, a lot of the major issues that have been brought up this year really have to deal with the first three, which are somewhat similar. So the first one with the TIP phase 1 update, we were diving into how best to prioritize projects. And so we were able to develop criteria as part of the mobility master plan to basically add weight to projects and help us have a discussion on how best to prioritize them, or how best projects are meeting the guiding principles in the mobility master plan. And so when we were having those discussions, there were questions on if there was enough guidance in the mobility master plan to make that connection between the guiding principles and the projects themselves, because it felt like some topics were a bit of a stretch in terms of, did this really meet the 2 points for this criteria or not? Or do we need a little more specific on how this project is actually getting those points or isn't getting those points? And so I just remember it coming up several times. They weren't major issues that we were able to work through a lot of them, but I just wanted to bring this back up because they were things that the board brought up at the time when we had the discussions. Is that enough detail, Cynthia, on as before I jump into the next one?
Not quite yet.
I can dive into more specifically what it.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, specifically, that'd be great.
So when we were talking about a lot of the projects in terms of like natural or environmental preservation, there was questions on, impact to, because the guidance was more specific. Did it impact wetlands or did it not? And then that determined whether it got any points or didn't. And the board at the time felt like that wasn't enough guidance to determine natural or environmental preservation. And so the hope was to add another criteria in there, so to justify giving or not giving points for projects on environmental preservation. But we ended up not, primarily because the criteria we had aligned with what we had in our planning documents at the time, and we didn't want to add another level to complicate it even more. We were also waiting for the climate action plan to be developed before we added more into that area. And so that's just one of the more specific topics that kind of came up with that.
Okay.
Is that more helpful?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's more helpful. Yeah.
And then for the second one, through phase 2 of the TIP update, when we were having kind of the more larger scale discussion of all the TIP projects, it was brought up a couple times that it really felt like there wasn't a huge amount of diversity of the projects. Even for walk and roll or walking or biking improvements, they were still attached to auto capacity projects, where it was specifically the comment that was made at the time of, where this intersection project, it seems to be benefiting cars more than bikes or pedestrians. There aren't any transit projects on there at all, so that's something that is kind of recognized as being lacking, that we're hoping to address with the transit study. And so that's just one of the other major topics that came up, that as we keep updating the mobility master plan or keep covering some of those topics, like updating our data on walk and biking, or having another discussion on concurrency, that'll help expand some of the diversity. But I just want to make sure I brought this back up too as one of the major issues that the board brought up in previous discussions. So is that a little more helpful on?
I think it is, and I think one of the problems I'm having with it, if I remember correctly, a lot of the TIP was legacy, and so I guess I'm having trouble understanding how updating the MMP could address the fact that the issue we had with project diversity came from the legacy of all those who were in the pipeline, and how changing it doesn't seem like I'm having a little disconnect that it's not really that changing the MMP isn't going to change the projects that are already committed to, or, you know, we're already in the pipeline that really we can't go back on.
You're right. It can't change anything that any of the projects where we're already made investments in them, but in terms of the larger list that we haven't started, that's where I think some of the discussion was made of, can we have a bigger impact on the rest of the list as we continue to work through the list and get through the current investments and start expanding to newer investments. We want to make sure that we're much closer to what the guiding principles are looking for, or what they're asking us to really prioritize in investments in mobility system.
Guess I keep coming back to, like, isn't that more of how to use the MMP to shape the TIP as opposed to a change in the MMP?
It is, but
Okay.
it's also the same question of, well, maybe we could provide more clarity or more guidance in the master plan as well.
Okay. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you.
And like I said, because we've only had, 7 months to implement the mobility master plan, maybe there's not a lot of issues that we've seen it just because we haven't had enough opportunity to implement it as much as we want to yet. But I know these were some of the issues that were brought up before, and so I just want to make sure I'm not trying to exclude any previous comments that were made, and still allow the board to have this review process at the end of the year.
Go for it, Julian.
I think there could be a lot more emphasis in the next cycle about, light rail visioning, how the station will look like. I think that's really important to fit into the mobility master plan in some sort, especially as we get closer to that timeline, and trying to integrate land use around the station as well, because as it exists right now, I'm not sure how well that station would work with the surrounding land uses. Just particularly by seeing that artist rendering at the legislative breakfast session, I'm just not impressed with how it's going to be looking like. So put some more land use in there as well.
What do the rest of you think? Are you all thinking dinner's getting cold? No, I'm just kidding. So, Stephen, maybe just go back to, I did see a question from Joseph. Maybe go back to just, I guess I'm wondering, I was just looking at the direction needed tonight, and that's what you've been saying. I'm just trying to absorb, like, I feel like this is a meaty topic, and there may be things that occur to us as we spend more time. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, are you actually saying that we have to decide, since we're going to have a comprehensive plan update in 2023, are you looking to us about whether we want a minor update? Are you looking for a recommendation on whether we do a minor update, or are you saying we will do a minor update, what should we include?
It's more about what topic as we start thinking about the comp plan update, which is when we'll be able to make an update to the mobility master plan. What are the big topics? And I'm sorry, I should have been more specific to this in terms of what question we're really trying to ask. What major topics should we be starting to think about as we look at at an update to the comp plan and ultimately an update to the mobility master plan? We'll be having those transit specific questions and discussions as we go through the transit study this next year. But we want to make sure we want to open the floor for any other topics that we should start thinking about now and planning into our work plan as we prepare for that bigger update.
So we are most likely not doing a minor update in 2022.
Not that staff are expecting to.
Okay.
If there's major things where we really think there's a conflict, we might take a look at something, but because of the comp plan, we're not looking to do a smaller update, but really a larger package as part of the larger comp plan full update.
Yeah, it seems like a crazy exercise to cram an update if there's not something that's glaringly like has to be fixed. I would agree with that. And Joseph, I haven't forgotten that you also said, but I guess now that you've given us this presentation, can we put it on the agenda in January so that we can ask the same question again? And I presume you'll ask this question, over the next coming months. But I think, and I know you've sent these materials out, but just going through this, just really, I want to make sure this isn't our last chance to, start having that discussion, which I'm sure it's not, but maybe we just ask people to think about this a little bit. I mean, I can think of some things right now. I don't think that we did a good enough job with equity explicitly in the existing plan. And I don't think we've made it clear how the connection between an equitable transportation system, I think it's not immediately obvious, I think, to non-transit nerds, how equity really can be, a transit system. I mean, a transportation system can be or not be particularly equitable, and any car dominant transportation system is going to be less equitable. So I think we need to be spelling that stuff out. So that's my comment. And I guess before I call on Joseph, who's been waiting for quite a while, can you just confirm, Stephen, that we'll be able to revisit this in the next couple of meetings to be able to bring big topics up?
Yes, yeah. So the intention with this meeting was really as part of a review of the past, 9 months. Is there any big glaring things that you remember in a lot of our discussions or a lot of our meetings that we should kind of keep in mind as we're starting to plan for the full comp plan update? But yes, the intention is to come back to the board with questions just like this, just looking more further ahead of as we are looking at the next couple of years, what's an important topic like equity to make sure that we are really in better consideration of how we're prioritizing our time and investments.
Okay, Joseph's been waiting a long time. Go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, so I guess like my comments to that, I agree with Julian that I think that the mobility master plan should reflect updates, especially in terms of like light rail, and the station that's gonna be in Issaquah, and also like land planning around that area. And I also agree that I think that equity is something that can be improved in terms of like the mobility master plan. And specifically like I guess implementing initiatives into it to make sure that equity is I guess something addressed in terms of the mobility master plan. But on top of that, I think that one thing that could be updated in the mobility master plan is I guess like implementing electric vehicles. Because I know that Jay Inslee passed legislation a while ago saying that like he wanted to regulate like electric vehicles, especially like approaching 2030. And I think that it's important to like, I guess, develop infrastructure around that by 2030, since I think they're going to be banned, like the commercial, um, or just like buying them. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think that's what I read. So I think that like developing initiatives in the mobility master plan around improving infrastructure for that might be a good idea. And also, this is sort of related, but around the first question, are there smaller items that need clarification? I think that like it might be a good idea, I guess, like to present updates around like transportation projects that are being worked on, like especially so that I guess the advisory board can comment on them. But that's just my personal opinion.
Did you, Joseph, before we move on, those are comments. You didn't have a question, right? I just want to make sure I didn't rush past if you were looking for a response from staff. Or
No, it was a comment, not a question.
Okay, thank you. Erica and then Micah after Erica.
Yeah, I'm trying to thumb through my notes from the last year, like as we're having this conversation, and I wrote down from like our February meeting about like I have a note here that says that we're not currently capturing like demographics on like transit user like within Issaquah. And I don't know, like I think that's what I meant by this. I'm not the best note taker, but and I guess for me, like if we're going to review the MMP, like if we are getting that data, I'm agreeing with what like Cynthia and Joseph S. and Julia, or yeah, I think Joseph have said about the like just making sure equity is like centered in the MMP maybe a little bit further. And for me, I think that yeah, we need to be capturing some data if that's possible on who's using what in town. As far as like mobility.
Erica, I started looking at my notes when you said that, so I trailed off a little. And I don't know if that was a comment, and then did you get what you needed? I don't want to rush to the next one before I. Okay, thanks. And then Micah.
Was that a follow-up to Erica, then Micah, or just to that and then Micah? I didn't.
Sorry, I'm looking at the chat and Erica got to make her comment. I didn't listen closely enough because I started looking at my own notes when she started commenting, and I'm confessing that my attention waned. I was wanting to make sure Erica said everything she wanted to say before we moved on to Micah. And did you have any questions that need to be answered? Okay. And then Micah, it's your turn. Sorry. It can be a klutz sometimes. Sorry. So yeah, Micah, you have a comment, right?
I do.
Go for it.
So, I was also looking back at my notes and what had originally caught my eye for the MMP was the sustainability report, our maintenance report of our roads. And I thought an element that's missing is when we make decisions about new projects, that we properly weight the long-term cost of maintenance and sustainability. And so, when I look at maintenance, I look at it from the direct dollar amount, but I also look at it as, are we creating the potential for erosion issues 10, 20 years from now? Are we having other sort of these long-term impacts? And cost is certainly an element in that. I think a great transportation system is one that's relatively, as far as expensive maintenance goes, on the lower end of it. We're making smart choices now for that, so that we in 30 years, our score for street maintenance is really high because we've lowered the cost to achieve that.
Thanks, Micah. I'm just moving a little slowly so that staff has plenty of time to take notes. Yeah, it's really great. Joseph.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Micah said, but also what Erica said reminded me that I forgot to say something. I think that in terms of like mobility and equity in transit, um, especially considering there are a lot of corporations moving into Issaquah, I feel like that's going to increase traffic. And so I feel like the mobility master plan, even though it already like reflects transit, I feel like it should um help to implement transit usage and also like public engagement with transit more, because currently like I've done a little bit of polling and I feel like not a lot of people that I know use transit, mainly because it's not as accessible on like the outskirts of Issaquah. And I feel like that could be a target area in order to eliminate traffic, since I feel like there's going to be a lot more of it, especially with corporations moving into Issaquah. And also I think that or I think that like it just might be more helpful in terms of like improving equity in Issaquah. Yeah.
Looks like Christy and Jerry. I'm gonna just poke at you a little bit. Do you have anything to share?
Christy here. I think that understanding there's a comp plan change coming in 2023 and also what's on the workload with Title 18, that an overhaul or big effort on the MMP doesn't make sense for 2022. But I do think that there's some significant topics that everyone's kind of touched on that are opportunities to maybe enhance or consider how it intersects with other aspects of things that are happening in the city. And I do agree, light rail, that could be a sea change for our community. It could be done really well, or it could be an afterthought and done very poorly and impacts the whole transportation system. So I think between that and then also the parking and circulation discussion that's going to be happening, that's significant and has could have some impact on the MMP as well. So those are just my 2 cents, but good conversation.
Erica, I'm gonna go to you after I just poke at Jerry and see if I can get Jerry to give us some thoughts. All right, hearing none. Go ahead, Erica.
Something that Christy said made me kind of think of, because I think we're looking at this of like, like just toggling small changes versus like what would we want, like a big overhaul. And I don't know if I would advocate for like looking into like a really like big overhaul of the MMP right away if this was like kind of just cemented in. Like I think if we take a bit of time for it to kind of bake, and then like as we're like moving about Issaquah, like we're probably going to notice more things, that we're having conversations and engaging with the public and whatnot, and then like that might be the moment to, if there's like a big change, then I think after having it kind of just seep in a little bit, since it is so like recently minted, then I know it's been like worked on longer than that, but that, I don't know, like that's kind of where my thoughts are.
Well, it looks like seeing anything else in the comments. There's some good discussion there. Stephen, do you feel like you got some good feedback?
I did. Thank you all. I think this will actually be really helpful as we're kind of looking at our work plan into next year as we're preparing for the comp plan update, but also even in preparation for the transit study, which I completely agree is a huge element of the the mobility master plan is that's really missing in terms of the projects, but also the discussion of the full transit system as we address traffic congestion, sustainability, and a lot of other city goals is really going to be weighing on our ability to expand our transit system. So this is really helpful. Thank you.
Well, are we ready to close on that topic? All
Yes,
right.
thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Okay. So now we're on to reports. Isabel, you want to take us through the work plan?
Yes. So we will be kicking off the new year with our work with the election of the vice chair that we will be taking place at the beginning of the meeting, the following meeting. The following meeting is scheduled for January 20th. From the topics that we have for that meeting, and this is something that we'll need to confirm with staff if we are on board with the same topics, is the neighborhood safety program introduction, title 18, more focus in the parking and circulation area, and Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized project discussion, which we have been postponing for quite a few meetings.
Were you just going to focus on January?
Oh, we can go through.
I wasn't sure what you wanted to cover.
Yeah, we can go through the next meeting after that, if you'd like. But yeah, so those are the topics that we have for the next meeting.
I think that for me, I've just been thinking about this every time the work plan comes up. I think what happens is my brain, it's um, carved up into the months, and maybe just the next 3 months should be outlined, and then the rest should just be future. I mean, this may be useful for you to be preparing, but I feel like when it does change as appropriate, and the way it gets presented each month, it's hard for me to wrap my head around where we're headed, like, because it's all just the way it's presented. So maybe, I don't know what the rest of you think, but like I look at this and I just gotta look a long time and really like dig in, because some things are repeating topics and some things that I'm like, oh, what are we gonna do in 2022? And it's hard to kind of glean the big picture. That's my point. It's hard to glean the big picture about what kinds of things we're going to tackle in 2022 when it's shown by month. Of course, it's helpful to know the next month, the month after that, like what we're going to do. But maybe when you're sharing it with us, I mean, I'm sure you have to slot these things in to plan and be prepared. But maybe when you're sharing it with us, it can be future topics, and maybe by quarter or something, so that we can get the big picture. I miss the big picture sometimes when I see it laid out in such detail by month by month by month.
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm alone in that.
Yeah, that's
So
something
I'm
we can
not
work on.
concerned about what we go through, whether we go through month by month and this meeting right now. I just maybe you can highlight we've just talked about what some of the big things we'll do in 2022. Maybe you could just comment on what else we should be wrapping our head around at this time for 2022.
Okay. So if we go through kind of like the highlights of what we will be doing on 2022, and I can actually, maybe it would be better to share my screen. It's okay. I wanted to share my screen, but I think why it's that. now I am able to share my screen, so I'll wish this would be helpful for the tab to kind of see. Are you seeing the board, the 2022 work plan? Okay. So one of the main things that we will be discussing for the next year, we will go through the annual recruiting, as we mentioned earlier today. We will talk about the Title 18, focusing on the parking and circulation. But the main things that we will be bringing that are new to the tab are the ADA transition plan. We will also talk about the concurrency update that we staff are working on. Also about neighborhood traffic safety program update and the ITS study that we will kick off that, as Stephen mentioned as part of his presentation earlier too. Performance metrics update and let's see, the 2023 comprehensive plan update, which we also kind of mentioned earlier. And we'll have parks again talk about the wayfinding program that they have.
Thanks, Isabel. Does anybody have any questions?
Stop sharing here.
Not hearing any. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, we have the great news that we were awarded a $3 million grant from the State Transportation Improvement Board to build to help with the construction of the third and last project that is part of Costco Development Agreement, which is the project on 12th and SR 900. That project will be constructing an additional turning lane from 12th Avenue to SR 900 South, and also the section between along 12th Avenue between SR 900 and Lake Drive. That section will include protected bike lanes and sidewalks on both sides of the street. So that's what I have. I don't know if Stephen has any other news to share. All right. Oh,
I guess I'll just make one quick announcement that I hadn't shared with everybody yet, but I've been I'll be moving on to a new role at the city, and I'll be the new long range planning manager in the planning department. So you'll be meeting a new transportation planner hopefully soon, who will be coming to talk about some of this work. And so I'll be coming in a larger capacity to talk about comp plan and land use, but more of a supporter role on the transportation side. And thank you for the round of applause that I can't hear.
I think that's awesome. I feel like that's when, like, you know, the person from your state ends up in the White House. You know, you feel like you're like somebody from our team is, you know, in that long range planning. I think that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, one of my main goals as part of the long range planning group is trying to get a more effort put into kind of that integration between transportation and land use, which is something we've discussed a few times, but something we're hoping to discuss even further. Thank you.
And congrats on getting that grant. That's awesome. That's great. Great news. All right, should I move on? I don't have a staff report. I mean, staff, I'm not staff. I don't have a chair report. Do we have a youth report?
So I don't have a youth report, but I will try my best, because now that I don't, or I just finished my midterms, I'll try my best to bring a youth report to the next meeting, since it's now winter break for me. But also I had two things I really quickly want to say. One, I hope that y'all all have like a really great Christmas. And two, I had some kind of good news I guess I wanted to share. I actually just recently got admitted into college. So I'll be attending college next year to study urban studies, which I thought was kind of cool.
Well, that's a great way to end. Any other business or announcements?
I have what? Sorry, I
Oh.
was gonna ask, where are you going? Or do you not know yet? You have like multiple things you're considering.
So I got accepted into my early decision school. So I'll be attending Washington University in St. Louis next year.
Nice campus.
Awesome. Congratulations. That's exciting. All right, team. Well, great meeting tonight. Thanks to the staff and to all you guys. This is great. Hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. And we'll see you in the new year. Yay.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy
Take
holidays.
care.
Thank you.
I was gonna add, the legislative session starts January 10, and you can stream all of the committees and floor, et cetera, on tvw.org. If you want to check out what the Transportation Committee is doing, some of it will inevitably trickle down to town at the local level. So, yeah. Okay. Happy holidays.
Thanks for sharing, Erica.
Yeah, I know.
Bye.